appreciate you being here. Uh, Again, I'm sorry, I don't know if that caught, but welcome to Storytime with Dave Booker. Appreciate you being here. Today we're going to be reading from book 4 again. And today we're going to do two. Let's do two for, and we'll do history, which is the first one that we're going to read. So let's begin. Not everyone who lived in town was warm-hearted, and not everyone was cheerful most of the time. There was that 1% who were never happy and tried their best to make their neighbors just as miserable as they were. Borris Morrison was enough in himself to cover the entire 1%. Surely, surly and mean, it was no wonder that he'd never married. Who'd have had him? For the 5th time in as many days, he had stormed into the courthouse complaining about his neighbors. Talbot had heard the complaints before and had them listed so that if he came in, all he had to do was write out the number or numbers of the complaints. Today were 5 and 2. 5 was that they got up too early and disturbed his early morning slumbers, and 2 was that his neighbors on the other side let their children color on the sidewalk. Talbot explained for the 100th time he couldn't make people wake up at a later time and that the sidewalk was free to everyone. And if kids drew on it, then it wasn't anything illegal. Or stormed out, slamming the door on behind him. On the other side of town, the lady about 60 was moving into her new home. As the movers brought her boxes in, she found fault with everything they did. They tried to be careful with their boxes, but she was saying that they were throwing them around. When one placed a box upside down, she threw a fit. Someone brushed against the wall, she grumbled and followed with a cloth. The men worked fast just to be rid of her. On the porch, she set up her furniture, sat with arms across her chest and a frown on her face, and waited. She watched as people came out of their houses and walked up to hers. Some had small baskets, some flowers, or a loaf of bread. Once close enough to look into the porch and see that forbidding contents, they either kept walking around the block to return home or did an abrupt about face and scurried back to the safety of their home. The lady harumphed. This town was no better married than the city she had just left. She had only come to this town because it had associations for her. It was where she had spent her youth. She had lived here right up until the point where she would have graduated from Sentinel High School. She angrily remembered how she had been pulled weeks away from going to her senior prom, hustled away from friends and everything that made her life enjoyable. She had been swept away to the city where she didn't want to be. Now she was older and had saved enough, she had returned. Town had changed in the intervening years. People were no longer friendly. They were no longer welcoming. No, she had expected it, and she had found it so. Margaret Dubray, who lived next door, was a gentle and timid soul who had made the attempt to welcome a new neighbor and had been quickly frightened off by her new neighbor's stern visage. Suddenly realizing there was one person who would not be in fear of this person, she leapt out the back door, hopped onto her bicycle, and pedaled furiously into town to see Sheriff Talbot. Arriving breathless but determined, she parked her bike next to a light pole and burst into his office. "Sheriff, there's a new lady in town. She lives right next to me, and she is scary as all get out. I tried to say hi, but got too scared, and I know she can't scare you, so will you please come and say hi to her?" She said this all in one swift exhale so that it took Talbot a moment to decipher what she had said. "I guess I'll go along and say hi. What's so scary about her?" "Oh, she looks real mean. I wanted to say hi and bring her a welcome basket, but look on her face almost had me in tears. I just turned around and went home and then decided to come to you." Talbot thanked Margaret for the information and, setting aside his gun belt, headed to wheel out the welcome wagon for the town's newest resident. The name on the mailbox was Kimmler and was written in white paint so recently that the paint was still wet and dripping. "Well, at least I know her last name." From inside the house, he could hear grunts and curses as the boxes were unpacked and things situated. Behind him came the whir of Margaret speeding by towards her house. He could hear the slam-bang entrance and slam-bang exit. She quickly arrived next to Talbot before he had even raised his hand to knock. He was just raising his hand to knock when the door was flung open. "Yeah, what you want? I didn't call for any police, and I sure don't think anyone called the police on me. I just moved in." Never lowered his hand and put his best public service face on. Yes, ma'am. I heard you had just moved in from your neighbor, Mrs. Dubray here. Came to welcome you to the community and ask if there's anything I could do. Looked over at Margaret, who was hiding half behind the sheriff and timidly holding a basket of bread, salt, a small bottle of wine, one of olive oil, and several gift cards. Traditional welcome basket since time immemorial. She took the basket and asked him inside. Do you know anything about putting together a bed? Those darn moving fellows just dump the pieces and never offer to put it together. Hey, where'd they expect me to sleep tonight? On a mattress on the floor? Talbot went upstairs to put together the bed. Margaret was roped into helping unpack and set things to rights. She had opened a box of pictures and was setting them on shelves when she came on one of a young couple dressed for a night out. Style dress showed it had been taken long ago, probably in the 50s. Placing its center on the shelf as Mrs. Kindler entered, she from putting her kitchen in some sort of order for getting lunch. Margaret put up the last of the pictures and turned smiling. She pointed at the picture. That's a nice picture. I can tell a girl was you. Was the man, or rather, did the man become your husband? The picture was snatched from the shelf and placed into her drawer. My personal life is none of your business, thank you very much. Margaret put the box down, departed swiftly to her own home in tears. Ella came down and was dismissed. He paused at the door. Well, welcome again to town. If there's anything we can do, just let us know. He walked back to the office, deep in thought. Well, looks we got a female Borris in town. I hope they never meet. The fireworks could set the whole town on fire. For some reason, the interaction made him desire to see Borris. Walking to the other side of town, he made his way to Borris's ancient home. It had been in his family quite a while, and he lived there with his ancient father. Talbot, knocking on the door, made Borris nervous. Talbot hastened to reassure him. Just want to check up and make sure everything was all right. Borris let him in. Well, they've been better, but folks around me have been pretty quiet now. Talbot had never seen a home so sparse. 2 chairs, a couple of television trays, and bookcases were all the front room contained. On the bookshelf were manuals for Borris's trade as a bricklayer. A few paperbacks center on the topmost shelf, a picture of a young couple dressed in 50s style, looking as if they were headed to the hop. Talbot stood looking around and noticed the picture. Yeah, nice looking couple. I didn't know you were ever married. Borris looked up as if he'd been stung on the backside by an angry hornet. Slammed the picture face down. I ain't. Never been married. Never want to be married. And I'm sure as hell never going to be married. We're doing all right, so you can just go about your business. Talbot nodded and said goodbye, then headed to the courthouse without knowing that a copy of the same picture was on another shelf on another side of town. As he approached the courthouse, he passed Joe, heading out to do a round in the squad car. Talbot paused with his hand on the doorknob, changed his mind, and went to see if Morgan was at work. Morgan was looking around over a survey of Tom's farm with a hash mark showing areas that he'd allow for events and spectators. His dad had an interruption and hardly invited Talbot in. Offering him a soda, he inquired about the reason for the visit. Oh, we decided to use the events you mapped out. From the discussions we've had with the farmers around here, it promises to be a big event. Bigger than we thought it could be. The responses we're getting in the paper seem to show it's going to be pretty popular. Well, anyways, what's on your mind? Talbot settled back in his chair and opened the Coke bottle with his belt buckle. I just been over to see Morris. You know who I mean. Morgan chuckled. Yeah, bet your life I do. He's been an ornery one for a hell of a long time. He made my life hell with his constant complaints about anything and everything his neighbors did. But he gave Rocky and you grief too. Talbot agreed that he had indeed continued to plague the office with continual complaints. Wasn't he ever nice, or is that just the way he was built? Morgan went into deep thought for a while. You know, he used to be a pretty all right guy back in his youth. He even had a girlfriend. I think her name was, Hester or Heather. They're pretty close, and everyone thought they'd get hitched right after graduation. Dad was a mason bricklayer and was setting Borris up for success. Then one day her family just up and moved. Never saw each other after that, and I guess that was what turned to mean. Kind of makes you think he must have been pretty deep in love, doesn't it? Talbot agreed. I saw a picture of him and a nice-looking young lady. I assume she's the one who moved away. He sat pensively for a while as he ruminated on the couple in the picture. Yeah, she'd have been my girl and moved away. I'd be pretty groused off most of the time, too. He got up and shook Morgan's hand. Thanks for the info. I was just wondering, as he approached the doorway, he turned back. Wonder why they never got in touch again. Okay, this is the next chapter. Makayla steps in. I'm going to grab a quick drink here. Hold on one second. My voice is doing pretty good today, so I don't want to mess it up. However, instant tea from England. It's got whitener and tea and everything. It's pretty good. Anyway, back to this. Makayla, Agnes, and Julia had received the information on the new arrival in town and set off en masse to welcome Mrs. Kimbler, or Ms. Kimbler. Walking from Julia and Morgan's home on the edge of town, they stopped in at the courthouse to get the latest information from Talbot and Joe. Talbot passed on his impressions of the lady. She's a grumpy, bitter lady who expects to be catered to. According to Margaret, she moved in, and the moment her things were unloaded into her house, she sat on the porch and waited to be welcomed. Agnes shrugged. In a town like this, it would be natural that people would drop by to welcome her. I didn't see why that was a problem. Well, it wouldn't be in the ordinary way, but she sat there with arms across her chest and a frown on her face. Folks who dropped by ended up walking past without stopping. Julia squared her shoulders. We shall not be deterred from doing our civic duty, no matter how inhospitable she is. We know our duty, and we shall do it. Ladies, forward, ho! Taking each other's arms, they marched down the street to welcome Ms. Kimbler, no matter what the cost. Approaching the house, it looked like any other on the street. The furniture on the porch was green metal, shell-backed and heavy. The table was glass-topped and tiled from around the border. A potted plant stood at the rear corner. Climbing on the steps, they heard the owner of the house pattering around and putting the place in order. From what they had heard, they were unprepared for the pleasant singing from inside. In the dim interior, they saw her slowly dancing with a framed picture pressed close to her heart. She placed the picture carefully on the shelf and patted it affectionately. Turning around, she saw 3 female heads pressed against the screen, gawping. The hell are you looking at? You want some? Knock! I swear this town's gone to the dogs. Well, what do you want? She stood waiting for an answer with her fists on her hips and look of defiance. It took a moment for the women to recover. Julia's voice shook as she answered for them. Well, we just wanted to welcome you to the area. We bought you a little welcome present. The screen door was open and the basket passed through. Well, you might as well come in and sit a spell. The offer was made, but made so grudgingly as to be taken almost to mean the opposite. Agnes shook her head. Well, thanks, but you're probably still unpacking and all of a muddle. We'll stop by a little later if you want. She passed over a visiting card. This is my number, and we are available if you ever get sick and want something or just want some company. Nice to meet you, and we'll get out of your hair. They waved, closed the screen door quietly, and beat a hasty retreat. Excuse me. Nobody said anything until they were out of earshot. Agnes wiped her forehead. Whew! She's a tough old bird. I don't think she's going to win any popularity contests around here. Julia agreed. Now she'll probably end up a hermit and stay miserable. On the walk through town, Makayla was silent, thinking about the picture she had seen on the shelf. I think I'll head over to the courthouse and see Talbot. She waved goodbye and headed to see her husband. In the courthouse, Talbot and Joe were playing a game of checkers with all the seriousness of a World Series championship. She basically sat down on a bench to wait. Small spritz of perfume and the warmth in the courthouse brought the scent to Talbot's and Joe's attention. Joe immediately got up and offered her a seat. She thanked him and sat with Talbot while Joe mentioned something about going home for lunch. He wanted to see the new lady, and it didn't go well. Talbot shrugged. Well, what did you expect? She's not a pleasant person. Sure, but there might be a reason. When he got there, she was singing and dancing with a picture. She paused as the memory played in her mind. She has a very pretty singing voice. She was actually pretty herself when she isn't frowning. The picture she was dancing with was of 2 teens. I think It was taken in the 50s. They were looking at the camera, holding hands in front of some building. Kind of looked like the high school. Talbot held up a hand. He'd seen the very similar picture to what they had only just recently. He racked his brain to remember where. Getting up, he paced while going over places that he'd been recently. Stopping abruptly, he barked out, "Got it! Old Borris has a picture just like that." Makayla burst into a fit of laughter and suddenly stopped. "You know, it might just make sense. I think I'll go see if I can catch a glimpse of that picture. It's the same one. He might want to know she's back." Makayla hot-footed it to Borris's place. Knocking on the door, she heard coughing and sneezing from somewhere. "Damn it, as if I didn't have enough on my hands with Dad being sick. Well, what you want?" She paused and felt the time was not right to inquire into Borris's personal life, and the father being ill might just be the entree that she required. But we heard your father was sick and wanted to see if we could, bring over some soup or anything else that you might need. Don't know how you could heard about the old man being sick, but yeah, some soup would probably do him some good. There was a pause as if Borris was struggling to get something out. "Thanks. We appreciate you calling." Makayla had him in and could do some good at the same time. "Great. I'll be back in a bit." She rushed home and pulled out some chicken out of the refrigerator. As she pulled vegetables out, she took inventory and realized she would have to go shopping soon. Being a town helper was important to her. It's her way of giving back to the town they called home. Plus, gave her something extra to do with Agnes and now Julia. From her recipe box, she pulled out the card for chicken soup. It was the same one all the ladies used. As the soup bubbled away, she made a mental note of the picture she had seen, so that if she saw Borris's, she would know if it was the same. Pulling out a large Tupperware bowl, she scoured it and scalded it to ensure it was as sterile as she could make it. Once the soup was just about warm, she poured it into the bowl and locked the lid, put the remaining soup in the fridge for dinner. Putting the bowl into a shopping bag, she headed over to minister to the sick. Arriving at the door, she heard a massive sneeze and cough. Through the screen, she saw Borris had succumbed to in the short time she had taken to prepare the soup. She knocked, entered, and sent Borris to bed. Calling the others in, she took command of the house. She reheated the soup and brought it into the men who were all tucked in. Mixed it, rubbed onto their chests, and a towel laid over themselves so they stayed clean while they ate. Within 5 minutes, there was another knock on the door, and the reserves entered. Makayla set them about straightening the house, sweeping what looked to be about a year's worth of dust off the floor, and in general making the place look less like a bachelor's quarters and more like a home. Peggy arrived and placed fresh oranges and opened the window to air the place out. Working away, joking and enjoying the task they had undertaken, Borris lay back and listened to the friendly banter of women talk. They came in, cleaned up his bedroom, carefully to not disturb his things, but to sweep and dust and air the place out. Done with him, they tackled his father's room. By the time they were done, Borris was feeling a little better. He got out of bed, dressed, and even felt good enough to shave and present a clean, fresh face to his guests. He made a pot of coffee and invited them to sit for a bit before they left. Toasted some bread and brought out a jar of jam from the cupboard. "Ladies, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for us today. It's the first time folks have been good to us in a donkey's years." He smiled shyly. "Yeah, I guess the way I always been acting kind of led up to it, but I'd like to apologize." He got up and shuffled into the living room. Looking around at the spotless cleanliness and freshness made him shake his head in wonder. Pulling the picture from the shelf, he brought it into the kitchen and passed it around. You might not think it looking at me today, but I was pretty passable in my day. I was in love too. Kind of love that only happens once in a lifetime. Kind of that when you lose them, you lose a part of yourself too. This here, he pointed to the female, was Heather. We were dressed up in what we planned on wearing to the prom. Prom was still a month away, but she wanted a picture of us before then. In 3 weeks, her family moved, and I never heard of where they moved to. Happened so sudden, it was a complete surprise. She never wrote, so I guess she forgot about me or just got too busy to keep in touch. A tear rolled down his cheek. Just when she took my heart so far away, I didn't have any left to keep up my spirits. Never did go to prom either. The wheels in Makayla's head were spinning so fast it was amazing no smoke was coming out of her ears. She was determined that Borris would be going to the prom, and there he would meet with his heart once more. So the next chapter we'll be reading on Tuesday is Friends at Last. So Makayla's got her work cut out for her, and I'm pretty sure she's going to succeed. So that is it for today. This one I decided we do two because it wanted to get a little bit longer. So I hope you enjoyed this chapter or these two chapters. I hope you'll be here on Tuesday for the next reading. I look forward to seeing you and hope you have a good day. So be good and be good to yourself. Bye.